Welcome, everybody. It's a pleasure to welcome you to this C&D rally, Selling Deaf, Why We Must Stop the Arms Trade. This week, the DSEI Arms Fair is taking place at the Cllr Centre in London. Many protests and actions are taking place, but these aren't isolated events. There is increasing protest across the country and internationally that is becoming increasingly effective. More and more young people are getting involved. This is a movement that is really taking off, and rightly so. The arms trade is nothing short of profiteering from deaf, and it's time to put a stop to it. We have a great panel for this evening's rally. We'll be hearing about the arms trade, why we oppose it, and how we can be most effective in our work to stop it. If you have any questions, please do use the Q&A box or the chat function, and our speakers will try and address your points during the course of the rally. So let's make it good and interactive. So we've got a fantastic panel, we've got great experts, we've got great activists, we've got elected representatives who are taking a really strong stand against these terrible events. And it's a great pleasure to welcome our first speaker, Rokhsana Fiaz, who is Mayor of Newham. And of course, Newham is the borough where the Cllr Centre is located. Rokhsana speaks out strongly against the arms fair, and 2 years ago, when we were able to protest more extensively in public, we were delighted to have her speak at our outdoor rally. So welcome to this rally, Rokhsana, even though it's online, and we look forward very much to hearing from you. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Kate. And firstly, I'd like to thank all of you for arranging this event and for all of your work in opposing the arms fair taking place in Newham this week. The movement against the arms fair is such a clear demonstration of how local action can affect the global, and I'm really proud to be part of this movement. To be joining you today, especially as the Mayor of Newham, to say that the arms fair is not welcome in our borough. As many of you will know, I've always been clear in my opposition to the arms fair in Newham since I stepped into office, and even previously as a councillor. I used to be a councillor in the ward that the Cllr Centre is actually located. And as a proud supporter of C&D and also a member of the Mayors for Peace Network, back in 2019, Newham Council voted to oppose the arms fair going ahead, and last year, full council called on the government to work for nuclear disarmament. As part of our commemorations for the anniversary of Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombings this year, we were honoured to accept a camellia seed via C&D from the Japanese government from a tree that had survived the nuclear atrocity in Hiroshima 76 years ago. Our parks team are nurturing that seed, and for me, it is an incredibly important symbol of our borough's remembrance of victims of nuclear weapons and our solidarity with those that have suffered. And this Friday is a peaceful demonstration of our opposition to the arms fair taking place at Cllr. We will be planting a ginkgo tree in Royal Victoria Gardens, which is a stone's throw away, as a permanent sign of our commitment to peace, but also more importantly, our opposition to this arms fair taking place here in Newham. And I very much hope that going forward, we do not have to come together in protest against the arms fair taking place in the Cllr building, which it has done for a considerable period of time. And we do this in terms of, planting this symbolic tree and undertaking the variety of actions that we have done in the period since I've stepped into office as the Mayor of Newham, is because the presence of the Arms Fair in Newham contradicts everything that myself, my councillors that are part of the council, my administration stands for. Newham, as some of you may know, is an incredibly enriched and diverse borough because of its international connections through its people. We are very much an international borough and the most diverse community or borough in the country. Just under half of our residents were born abroad, and we have some 242 languages and dialects spoken in our communities. This means that our residents have connections to every part of the world, and so many of our communities have links to those areas that have been affected by conflict, displacement, and the horror of war. So these conflicts do not feel abstract or far away to our communities here. They are real and close to home. And the Arms Fair presence here is an insult to those that have fled violence to make London and Newham their home, or who are worried about loved ones around the world. And I've been acutely reminded of this recently through the residents who have contacted me in desperation about family members in Afghanistan. Some themselves had arrived in Newham as asylum seekers in previous waves of resettlement. And it brought home to me and to us here at the council the horror of the cycle of ongoing conflict and violence which has affected the Afghan people. And I'm proud that Newham will now be accepting 10 refugee families as part of the Afghan resettlement programme here in London as part of the national response, and they will be a welcome part of our community here. However, you will all agree that this scheme has not gone far enough. And while we were told that there was not enough resource to resettle more refugees, it's an insult to the people of Newham and of London and this country that the government has sent officials to this arms fair and has used public funds to grant arms licenses for sales to countries with appalling human rights records. And this perpetuates conflicts and creates more refugees, but government then holds up its hands and denies responsibility. We also know that when this event took place in 2019, it involved the presence of 5,609 police officers. This is a resource that is simply not available for community policing, making our communities feel safe every day, or for crime prevention work in our borough. And so what we are asking is not just an end to the arms fair, but the government stop licensing the sale of these weapons altogether and end this British industry that is profiteering from death. And of course, we are also asking that the British government redirect the £205 billion cost of Trident away from nuclear weapons and instead invest in creating a green economy and in homes and in health. In Newham, we've seen were some of the most deprived neighbourhoods in the country, and yet on doorsteps we are seeing billions wasted on weapons of mass destruction. So that's why I'm proud to be with all of you here today to make it clear that the arms fair here in Newham and everything that it represents is really not welcome here. It is abhorrent that a stone's thrown away from where I am working, where I am speaking to you from. We know that today's weapons are being sold that will be used to commit tomorrow's atrocities. So I want to say thank you again for standing with Newham against the arms fair and for enabling us to be part of this very, very important mobilisation and movement. And I redouble my efforts and restate very clearly that the arms fair here at the Cllr is not in our name and not in our borough. Thank you, Kate.
Thank you so much, Rokhsana. Thanks for those very strong and moving words, and we'll do our very best to work with you to make sure that this is the very last arms fair that takes place in your borough. So thank you so much for joining us this evening. So our next speaker is also an elected representative. It's a great pleasure to welcome Councillor Lawrence Brown, who's currently still chair for many years now of the Liverpool Against the Arms Fair campaign. Now, we've been following this campaign quite closely. We know that at certain points you've been meeting with some success, but I've also heard that perhaps people are trying to row back on that from the pro-arms fair lobby and so on, so that there's still a lot of work to do. I've also heard there was a massive, great, vibrant demonstration in Liverpool at the weekend. So please tell us about your experiences. The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Kate. Thanks for the introduction, and thank you to Rokhsana for an excellent speech. I'd like to echo what Rokhsana said about the arms fair that might be taking place in London, or is taking place in London now, and a similar event going to be taking place, it seems, in Liverpool, unless it's halted fairly soon next month. So just for background, I'm a born and bred Scouser, so I've lived in Liverpool all my life. I've been a Green Party member for 41 years, and I've been a Green Party councillor in the city for 7 years, and I'm proud to represent the ward that I do. And as Rokhsana said before, Liverpool, as you will know, is a very diverse community too, and Greenbank ward is part of that. So although I'm speaking to you about a rally and DSEI, we in Liverpool have an arms fair coming up ourselves, as Kate has said, on the 11th and 12th of October. So that's the AOC Europe, which used to be called the Electronic Warfare event. Now, I first heard about this approximately a year ago, a bit more than a year ago, when I was tipped off by a Green Party councillor in Glasgow, would you believe? That was as a result of someone from Campaign Against the Arms Trade taking note of where events were occurring around the country. At that time, all the horrors of the war and conflict throughout the world suddenly seemed a lot closer to home. An arms fair in my own city, I couldn't really believe it. And even worse, in a building owned and controlled by the city council, involving council taxpayers' money and taxpayers' money probably across the country as well. Difficult to believe that that was the case. Since then, the fair got postponed. That was supposed to be held last autumn. It got postponed to this year. And then it got switched to Seville in Spain. And again, Seville turned around and said, well, we don't want this event. And fortunately, probably with stronger regional powers than we have here, they managed to send them packing. And now it's come back to Liverpool. Again, we didn't find out about this until the end of March, when someone from Spain actually tipped us off that it was coming about over here. And just to explain that, what I've just said, which is getting told by someone in Glasgow and then getting told by someone in Spain that an arms fair is coming to Liverpool, is part of the problem that we've got in trying to get information out of decision makers, out of bodies which should be much more transparent. And that hasn't been the case, and that hasn't been the case throughout. And that's partly what we're fighting here, is the transparency of both the council and the ACC. The ACC Liverpool Limited is a fully owned company, arm's length company, which manages the event venue on behalf of the city council. And that, you know, the way that the actual event has been put together and advertised and the rest of it is not acceptable to us as a campaign group. So I'm not going to rehearse all the arguments for and against the event. I think they're fairly obvious anyway. But I will say in what we're doing to try and oppose the event, and hopefully people in London and elsewhere can join with us and support us, and we can support them in trying to rid this country of these awful events. So the first step we had was to bring together the individuals and the groups that had committed to opposing the arms fair last year when it was originally scheduled. We brought them into a single campaign group, which Kate has referred to, which is Liverpool Against the Arms Fair. And that's a broad-based collective of people, campaigners across political parties, ethnic and religious groups, and national groups such as the Palestine Solidarity Campaign, campaigns against the arms trade, and CND, etc. The strength of the campaign is that it cuts across lots of different aspects of civil society, bringing together a wide range of people with a shared aim, and that is to oppose this awful event. So Liverpool has a good track record of opposing injustice, and this is another fine example of that. Personally, I'm opposing this event for many different reasons, but not least the impact on communities and the environment across the planet. I'm sure we'll hear more of that from the other speakers tonight. So the campaign has been a multi-pronged one. It's a multi-pronged approach. We've had a petition going right from the beginning, which has now reached 6,000 names. We've put pressure on councillors, the Mayor of Liverpool and senior council officers to do what they can to stop the event taking place, and to put in place an ethical charter, much like Glasgow has, to stop the likes of this happening again in future. Unfortunately, this hasn't been very successful to date. The council argued that the venue's arm's length management company, which is the ACC Liverpool Limited, has full control of bookings and can't impact on that, which is pretty awful. We've also been putting pressure on local MPs and others across the country to put pressure on the ACC to cancel the event. Unfortunately, again, one of the city's MPs has not signed up to that, so that's disappointing from our point of view. We've been encouraging those who are booked into the venue, into the ACC. It's both an exhibition centre and an event for holding, a venue for holding mass events, to actually cancel or consider their positions. So quite a big band, the Massive Attack, have actually pulled out now as a result of hearing about the Arms Fair and being very concerned about it. And the National Education Union and the National Union of Students are both considering their positions now, certainly with regards to anything in the pipeline and future bookings as well. We're pressing that with trade unions and political parties, both of which have used the event space in the past. So we are hopeful that they will turn their backs on it as well if this Arms Fair isn't cancelled. So we had on Saturday, as Casey's just referenced, a lively and noisy demonstration, probably the first big demonstration that's occurred since COVID restrictions were removed, through the streets of central Liverpool. So some excellent speakers and so forth. Thousands of people from the city and across the country, mainly northwest of England, were represented there. It really felt like we were moving ahead and doing a fantastic job of getting the word out there to people. Done a lot of leafleting across the city, a lot of posters gone up. So getting the word, the communication out, social media's been very heavy on it. It's been fantastic. Yeah, I'll just finish a little bit more. Yeah, thanks for that. And then we've had articles and broadcasts in the national and local media as well. And also we've started some legal action, or the beginnings of some legal action against the council through the Public Interest Law Centre. So it's our view that, you know, the venue and the ACC Liverpool Limited turning around and saying that Liverpool is hosting a range of public, private and trade events every year, boosting the local economy. That's absolute nonsense. We should not have this event on the back of boosting the local economy. This is causing death and destruction across the planet and should not be occurring in our city. And as Rokhsana said before, we do not say in the name of us this is going to be held in our city. We will oppose it to the end. And if it goes ahead, we will oppose any future events in the future. Thank you very much.
Brilliant, Lawrence. Thanks so much for that. I mean, there's a lot of learning there for other campaigns, really. I mean, that's been incredibly helpful, and all power to your collective elbow up there in Liverpool in making sure you get rid of that for good. So our next speaker is Andrew Feinstein. Andrew used to be a member of Parliament, actually, in South Africa, but he's shifted into a somewhat different arena. He's author of The Shadow World, Inside the Global Arms Trade, which is an investigation into the global arms industry. And also he's director of Shadow World Investigations and a board member of Declassified UK, the investigative journalism website. I happen to know you're a real mine of information on this subject, Andrew. So welcome. We're really looking forward to hearing what you have to say.
Thanks so much, Kate, and thank you so much to CND for organising this rally today. And may I also just thank Rokhsana and Lawrence, as a former elected representative, what Al Gore always called a recovering politician, for the stand that you have both taken against arms fairs in your respective areas. As I said to you earlier, if only there were more of you, but I'm sure there will be over time. Today is yet again a day of shame for London as the DSEI Arms Fair opens. And I thought that perhaps what we should do is just go over again why we cannot afford to allow this jamboree for the arms trade to take place in London, why we have a responsibility to profoundly and fundamentally change and alter the nature of the global arms trade and the militarism that underpins it. So in the 5 minutes I have, I'm going to give you 5 quick indications of what the arms trade actually does in our world. First of all, and most obviously and tragically, the trade in weapons is responsible for over 500,000 deaths every year. And as we sit here tonight, that includes in Yemen, where over 20,000 civilians have been killed in violations of human rights, in violations of international law, and probably in the perpetrating of war crimes. The Saudi and Emirati-led coalition in Yemen has intentionally targeted places of residence, places of worship, schools, hospitals, places of employment. Those 2 countries are well represented at DSEI, and all of the companies from the United Kingdom, the United States, Germany, France, Spain, and other countries that are providing the weapons that are enabling and facilitating those murders are also represented at DSEI today. The global trade in weapons is responsible for 40% of all corruption in all world trade. And when we talk about corruption, let us remember that it is not only the members of the Saudi royal family or the Emirati ruling family who benefit from the bribes. There is in the global arms trade what we describe as the feedback principle. Excuse me, this is about my 5th talk today, so I'm struggling a little bit. I think I have a bit of a sore throat, and I think I might be losing my voice. We have what's called the feedback principle. So when Britain paid £6 billion in bribes on an arms deal with Saudi Arabia, Mark Thatcher, the then Prime Minister's son, received a bribe of £12 million. Sir Richard Evans, the executive chairman of BAE Systems, the company that fulfilled the contract, received a flat in Mayfair in West London worth £6.5 million. And this is in the 1980s we're talking about. Tony Blair personally has made tens of millions of pounds out of his involvement with the invasion of Iraq, the invasion of Afghanistan, and his acting as salesperson in chief for many of Britain's largest arms fairs. And then, of course, finally, Prince Andrew and his great mate, Jeff Epstein. Prince Andrew acts as a salesperson for British arms sales all over the world. And that's probably where he first came across Jeffrey Epstein, who has been used for his repulsive and appalling activities by the global weapons companies over the year. Thirdly, the trade in weapons undermines the rule of law and democracy. A few years ago, the campaign against arms trade won an appeal court decision that declared that the British government's arms sales to Saudi Arabia were unlawful because the government was not considering the likelihood of these weapons being used in violations of international humanitarian law. The responsible minister, Liz Truss, a few months after this appeal court decision, had to admit that the government just went ahead with 3 arms exports, regardless of the court decision. I believe that our arms sales to Saudi Arabia and the Emirates are in violation of British law and bilateral, multilateral, and international agreements. We should also think about the massive socioeconomic opportunity cost of the arms trade. When I was a member of parliament in South Africa, my own government decided to undertake a $10 billion arms deal in which there was $350 million of bribes paid, mainly by BAE Systems. This was at a time that 6 million South Africans were living with HIV or AIDS. Our government said it did not have the financial resources to provide antiretroviral medication for these 6 million people through our public health system, resulting in the deaths of 365,000 South Africans over the next 5 years, and the birth of 32,000 babies a year for each of those 5 years, HIV positive.
Time, please, Andrew.
Thank you. And finally, let us remember that the arms trade acts as a massive contributor to the climate crisis facing the world. The Pentagon is the world's largest institutional polluter, and 25% of all jet fuels used are used by military jets. So in conclusion, unless we stop Dicey and the Liverpool Arms Fair, if we allow the global arms trade to continue as it is, the world will continue to be made a poorer place, a more corrupt place, a less democratic place, and most important of all, a much less safe place for all of us who live in it. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much indeed, Andrew. That's absolutely fascinatingly interesting and incredibly disturbing, I should say, as well. Okay, everybody. So we're now going to take a slight international turn. We're going to hear from our colleague from Germany, Ruth Rohde, from the Arms Information Center in Freiburg in Germany. Ruth is involved in campaigning against the arms trade and also campaigning for nuclear disarmament. So double welcome on that. Over to you, Ruth.
Thank you so much, Kate, and thank you also again to everyone who organized the event and also to all of you attending the event. And especially a big thank you to all of you who are working to stop the DSEI Arms Fair, to stop the arms fair in Liverpool and the arms trade in general. I think it's really inspiring to see the ways in which all of you are questioning and opposing the logic of war through nonviolent protests and also nonviolent and peaceful resistance. I also would like to just take this opportunity really quickly to thank the other speakers and incredible activists present at this event for their tireless efforts to make the world a better place for the many and not the few. I'm also really glad to speak to you today as a young member of the German peace movement, because as you all know, the arms trade is a really international business. And so I think our opposition to it must be international as well. What do I mean when I say the arms trade is international? I do not just mean that some of the largest arms manufacturers in the world are gathered in London these days to showcase their latest products of war and death and sell them to as many countries as possible. Over the last decades, we have seen a lot of extremely worrying trends toward an internationalization of the industry. Arms manufacturers, like many other industries to be fair, have collaborated on product development and also outsourced business to third countries. Now, why exactly is that a problem? It's a problem because these policies are about more than just cost reduction. They enable manufacturers to undermine stricter local restrictions and give governments cover for claiming non-responsibility for exports. I want to give you an example of this that involves both the UK and Germany. Among the big players present in this year's DSEI are three companies that probably most of you are aware of: BAE Systems, Airbus, and Leonardo. Together, these companies form the British, German, Spanish, Italian Eurofighter Consortium, the group that builds the Eurofighter Typhoon jet. Saudi Arabia is in possession of at least 71 Eurofighters after one of their 72 planes crashed in Yemen in 2017. We already heard about Yemen today. Since 2015, according to the Yemen Data Project, Saudi Arabia and its allies have flown 23,470 air raids in the country, hitting and targeting many civilian facilities and events such as hospitals, factories, weddings, and funerals. This, Andrew already mentioned this is not news to you. What I would like to offer you is a more German perspective on this case. Many activists here in Germany who care about the lives of Yemenis were somewhat relieved when in 2018, the German government responded to the murder of Jamal Khashoggi with a ban on German arms exports to Saudi Arabia, only 3 years into the war. Does that mean that Germany cannot export arms to Saudi Arabia anymore? Does it mean that the German section of Airbus can no longer continue to contribute to the Eurofighter planes still destined for the Saudis? Wouldn't that be nice? You probably guessed that the answer is no. Supplying European cooperation arms projects remains possible even under this ban. Now, the big question for us always is, how does the German government justify this? Well, a big role is played by a complete contortion of the term multilateralism. So what does that mean? Basically, what sovereignty is to some in British politics, multilateralism is to the Germans, the card that is supposed to trump all others. If the German government says it is in the interest of multilateralism to continue to work with the UK to supply a war that has caused the world's worst humanitarian catastrophe, then that is supposed to quell all criticism. For example, our defense minister has argued that if Germany wanted to be involved in European projects, that could mean these projects do not underlie the strict German rules. Let that sink in for a moment. Here we have a German defense minister effectively arguing that German laws should not apply when it comes to European defense projects. The whole problem becomes even more evident when we look at German-French cooperation on arms. Germany and France are currently planning to co-develop a next-generation fighter jet system called Future Combat Air System. Ahead of the development, the two countries agreed in 2019 that each country can only object to export requests by the other party if vague exceptional circumstances of immediate threats to national interest or security apply. In the future, it is therefore no stretch to expect a multitude of claims that any given controversial export is to the benefit of German-French cooperation, a value deeply rooted in German political culture for obvious historical reasons. The effect of this charade is that European multilateralism is hereby transformed from the idea of not fighting each other to supplying war elsewhere in the world. That is a very dangerous reinterpretation of the term. What I'm trying to illustrate with this example is how the arms trade is more and more attempting to outrun our national campaigns, our national jurisdictions, and overtake notions of international solidarity. This means that we have to stop the arms trade because we want our national and international communities to be founded on peace and solidarity, not on fighting wars together. We have to stop the arms trade so weapons cannot become a tool of political patronage, and we have to stop the arms trade to protect lives. You all are contributing to this goal in supporting your local peace organizations and their international partnerships. Thank you so much.
Thanks very much indeed, Ruth. Sorry, the timer was just going on off as you stopped. That was really, really interesting. And it's really great to have a voice from Germany on this crucial issue. And I hope we can use this as an opportunity to begin further cooperation. I know that you and Andrew already work together, but let's hope we can involve CND in that relationship as well. So thank you very much. And now we have a bit of a treat. We have a little film. This is because our next speaker was due to be Mélina Villeneuve in person. Mélina is one of the founders of Demilitarized Education, known as DeDucation to many, active in the universities. Mel was or is probably still down at the DSEI Arms Fair. I know she was down there earlier on, being active and so on, taking initiatives. So as she can't be here in person, she sent us a short video instead. So Sarah, when you're ready, if you could put that up. Okay.
Hi, everyone. It's great to be here. I would first like to start by thanking the Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament for inviting, me to represent Demilitarized Education to this panel of incredible speakers, to be featured alongside politicians, campaigners, and even our own mentor, Andrew Feinstein. It's truly an honor, and I am so grateful. As everyone, is here for today, I'm here to give DeDucation's 2 cents on the topic of this week, which is the DSEI Arms Fair. Now, I, like many others, am usually a fan of exhibitions and fairs and whatnot, but the DSEI Arms Fair is one which makes my skin crawl, okay, and whose existence I truly despise with every fiber of my being. When rapper/activist Low Key called it a festival of death last week outside the East Gates while we were protesting, he could not have been more spot on. What is taking place this week is nothing less of a disgrace, especially in a country that is a signatory to numerous treaties and international laws written to protect human lives across the world from senseless war, conflict, violence, and corruption. Right. Now, as I said before, I am one of the co-founders of Demilitarized Education, otherwise known as DeDucation, DED_Ucation, which is an organization that my friend Ginsella and I founded to address one of the roots of the global arms trade, university research. Between research grants to universities, postgraduate programs for STEM students, and the general presence of arms companies at universities for careers fairs, the links between the arms trade and our higher education institutions is closer and tighter than ever. I could not have asked for a better example of this than the panel happening at DSEI this week on the 16th of September called Innovating Through Universities, Developing Tomorrow's Capabilities. Now, the person who is chairing this panel is Dr. Craig Marsh, who is the director of University of Lincoln's International Business Schools. And there are 3 speakers to this panel. Ben Whitaker from the Ministry of Defense, Dr. Simon Harwood, who's the Director of Defense and Security at Cranfield University, and Nick Boutani, who is a representative from Northrop Grumman, UK and Europe. They are not even hiding anymore the fact that this industry heavily relies on the bright young minds at universities, right? Welcome to the New World Order, where your ethics as a student may be compromised because the only job that you can get with your degree is one in the arms trade. And I'm not saying that there are no other jobs anywhere else. I'm saying that the one that will come with the wage acceptable for you to live a happy and successful life. Now, myself and Ginsella and our whole community at DeDucation are dedicated to not only exposing how nefarious and outrageous these ties are during a time like this of climate change and racial justice, but also to promote endeavors universities should follow, as opposed to selling out to an industry like the global arms trade, especially when you consider that many of these universities market themselves as champions of peace and leaders of innovation. But I ask you this, innovation for what? For a better planet, or to find new ways of generating profit for warmongers? Is it innovation to sustain peace or to create new conflicts abroad? We say at DeDucation that it's time to put these bright young minds at university to work on projects that are not only sustainable, but are not complicit in creating tomorrow's wars. Our social media presence has created a place for anyone to join us and put their skills to use to fight the arms trade. We create media content like podcasts and videos on YouTube for everyone to learn about the industry and equip themselves with the right weapons to fight the arms trade, pun intended. And recently, we launched our website, DED1.co, DED1.co, which holds our interactive university database in order to track how much money there is at universities that come from the arms trade. You can create an account and participate in the building of this database with us because it is interactive. And it's interactive because this fight for peace is one in which we are all involved. As the saying goes, people have the power and power to the people. Together, we can bring the arms trade down and finally put an end to atrocities like the DSEI Arms Fair. Thank you.
Well, huge thanks to Mélina in her absence. I mean, that's just fantastic. I only heard about DeDucation just a couple of weeks ago, maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago, and I think it's amazing the work that they're doing. And one of the things I always find deeply shocking is the way that the military and so on, you know, they have a presence in universities. And in the 1980s, I know CND fought incredibly hard against the presence of the military in schools, you know. So this is a very, very important area of work. So we send our very best wishes to DeDucation, and I look forward to going on the new website. So, okay, we'll turn to our next speaker now. It's a real pleasure to welcome Carol Turner, who's Vice Chair of C&D. Some of you will know her as Chair of London Region, and of course, because DSEI is taking place in London, it's of particular concern as an issue to the London region of C&D. So I think Carol will bring a specific anti-nuclear perspective to the discussion. Welcome, and over to you, Carol.
Thanks very much, Kate. Really pleased to be here with all of our lovely panelists. I just want to say to the DED speaker that London CND is very active in promoting students and also in working with DED in order to do that. My brief, it won't surprise you, is to talk about nuclear weapons at the DSEI Arms Fair. Let me just say, because Kate mentioned London Region, that we had a committee meeting last night, and the majority of that meeting was devoted to talking about the Arms Fair and the actions and how our groups across London are supporting that. Okay, so I'm going to make a few general remarks, but before I do, let me tell you why CND is so closely involved in this. There are a number of very big arms companies that are involved in nuclear weapons production, maintenance and development, in particular in Trident. And they're all at the Arms Fair, and that includes BAE Systems, which is helping to provide a replacement for the current Vanguard fleet of nuclear missiles system. It includes Boeing, which is also involved in Trident. It involves Rolls-Royce, which is working on the propulsion systems for UK's nuclear submarines, and it involves Raytheon, which is involved in the guidance systems, the missile guidance systems. There are others too. So we as CND have got a very big interest in protesting and raising awareness about the undesirability of the Arms Fair that's taking place in London over the next few days. there is an arms export controls committee in Parliament, which is responsible for checking that the arms sales that the UK government sanctions, authorises. And it has eight specifications, 8 criteria by which they must be judged. One of them is whether or not the weapons that Britain sells are likely to be used deliberately to target civilians and civilian populations. And I think if we look back to the war in Afghanistan, in Iraq, in other parts of the Middle East over the last two decades, what we can say is the arms sales that Britain has been involved in have clearly and consistently. It's also the case that it is impossible to use a nuclear weapon without targeting civilians. Nuclear weapons are weapons of mass destruction that affect civilians and civilian infrastructure as much as they do anything else.
Carol, could you turn off your
whole notion?
Carol, could you turn off your video, because we're getting kind of shaky sound as a result, I think, if you can.
I've done that, Kate. Apologies to everyone. Is it better now? Can you hear me clearly?
You've got a couple of minutes, but go ahead, that's fine now.
Okay, thanks. I'm really sorry about that. What I was doing was running through the various nuclear Trident related companies that are showing the wares over the next few days at Excel Centre. I won't repeat that. Hopefully you've picked up some of it. And the other thing I was touching on was the fact that Parliament has an Arms Export Control Committee, which exercises oversight over granting export licenses to manufacturers to sell arms abroad. And one of the supposed conditions under which it operates is to ensure that the arms that are being sold are not likely to be used against civilian populations. And I was making the point that clearly that was not the case in Afghanistan, Iraq, or other places where, as much as anything else, those wars that Britain was deeply and dishonorably engaged in were a showcase for the sort of exports that Britain and British arms companies were making. And it's clearly the case that if you're talking about the sale of nuclear weapons related equipment and facilities, then of course you are targeting innocent civilians. And just let me say, by the by, if you want to know a bit more about that, one of our vice presidents, Catherine West MP, has recorded a video for London CND about this. And if you Google London CND website, you will find your way to that, and she'll tell you exactly how shocked she was when she sat on that committee to find out the way in which government ministers completely disregarded the criteria supposed to be measuring.
Okay. Time's up, Carol, I'm afraid.
Okay. The final point I wanted to make, if I may, for 3 sentences, please, Kate, is to say that Britain is involved in a series of plans for future military adventures. Not only do they involve potentially nuclear weapons and the use of nuclear submarines, but they are also one of the ways in which this government showcases what its manufacturing companies can sell in the way of arms. You will have to search high and low in order to find a category of arms sales which don't involve breaching the criteria on humanitarian and civilian concerns that I've mentioned. Thank you for listening. I'm sorry if it's been difficult to hear me. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Carol. That's great. That's very important, particularly about the parliamentary committee. And talking of parliamentary, I was going to leave Jeremy Corbyn till last, but actually he's informed me that if a bell goes, he'll have to leave immediately for a vote. So, Jeremy, you're spared doing the grand finale, which I like you to do normally. So would you speak to us now, please? This is Jeremy Corbyn.
Thanks, Kate. I may have to be brief because we're just finishing the debate on the scandal of the way in which national insurance is being changed. And obviously I want to vote on that. And when you called me a few minutes ago, I was actually speaking to Barnet Unison, who are defending jobs and conditions in Barnet. Last Saturday, I was in Liverpool for the demonstration against the electronic warfare fair that's being held there. And there was a huge turnout on the demonstration. And as we walked through the centre of Liverpool, it was very unusual because we've all been on marches and demonstrations over the years. When you walk through the middle of a town or the middle of London, you sometimes get opposition, you get irritation, you get sort of a nil response. Liverpool, very different. They came out the shops, they came out the pubs and cheered the march and supported the march because they don't want their city to be associated with what they described as the merchants of death. Those that assemble there, arms dealers, and the organizers claim it's all done legally and within the terms of international law. No, it's the arms dealers that buy things, the arms dealers that sell things, the sub-arms dealers that sell them to some other sub-arms dealer, and they end up killing people. At the global level, we sell arms to Saudi Arabia, children in Yemen die. So the hypocrisy of the British government saying it gives money for the reconstruction of Yemen, whilst at the same time as giving huge arms supplies to Saudi Arabia. We're doing both things. We're destroying Saudi Arabia, then paying for the rebuilding of Saudi Arabia. The hypocrisy is unbelievable. And it is time to oppose these things. And well done, the people of Liverpool and all over the Northwest that came to the demonstration on Saturday, and to those groups, music groups and other organizations that have said, unless this arms fair is cancelled, they will never go to that venue ever again. And others are doing the same. So there's an economic impact that we can all have on those that choose to host arms fairs for the merchants of death. And I can see my good friend Andrew Feinstein on this call this evening, who stood up against arms dealers in South Africa and the corruption that they brought to the government of South Africa, and indeed they bring in their wake wherever they go. So if we're to live in a world of peace, then it cannot be right that we host arms fairs. But it's also about rejigging our economy, and I think we've got to be very clear about this. The bell's just going. Defend those jobs and those skills. Ensure that we don't send people into unemployment. Instead, we support them in using those skills to make socially useful products and reconstruct our economy in the direction we would want it to go. This world faces a health crisis, a COVID crisis, an environmental crisis, a poverty crisis, a refugee crisis. None of those crises are resolved by the international arms trade. And absolutely the last word I'll say before I literally run down the steps and go and vote against this terrible government will be this. Afghanistan has driven millions of people into exile, killed thousands of Afghans, killed thousands of American soldiers, killed hundreds of British soldiers. And it hasn't been a success. 20 years of occupation has led to this. And so there's a debate in Afghanistan tomorrow. And if I get called to speak, I'll simply be saying this: rejig the dial, turn the dial. Let's move on to a foreign policy based on peace, justice, democracy, human rights, and equality, not on a global role for Britain or for the United States. There are some Tories that think we should take over the US role. Just remind them, we're a small island, 65 million people on the northwest shores of Europe. We can do better than that. We can become an exemplar for peace, justice, human rights, and environmental sustainability, not become a merchant of death. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Jeremy. We really appreciate that. We're with you. Solidarity.
I'll come back on if there's only one vote. If there's 2 votes, I'll be longer. Anyways,
Okay.
See you later. Bye.
Thanks, Jeremy. Bye. Thank you. Okay. So yes, Chris Stewart says, well said, Jeremy. Quite right. And Paula says, brief but brilliant as always. Brilliant. Okay, so we have one speaker left for our rally. That's Kirsten Bays from Campaign Against Arms Trade. I know Kirsten was down at Excel earlier on in the rain. I saw her there at the rally. Kirsten isn't here in person because she thought she might not get a link, but she sent us a video with her message. So, Sarah, when you're ready, let's see it.
Hello, my name is Kirsten Bays. I'm CAT's local outreach coordinator. Great to be joining you this evening. I'm hoping to also be zooming in from the DSEI protests that are taking place in East London. But just in case, I thought we'd record a brief introduction and talk a little bit about DSEI, talk about why it's important, and we're going to talk a little bit about how you can resist it and the other arms fairs that are taking place this autumn. As for DSEI itself, it's a biennial arms fair. It comes back to London every 2 years. It's resisted each time because it brings together the arms sellers, typically big arms companies, arms buyers, typically the representatives of repressive regimes. And on display, there's every type of weaponry that you can imagine, everything from warships to warplanes, through to missiles, artillery pieces, military vehicles, as well as guns and bullets. Something like 900 companies will be displaying their wares. That's about half the normal number that normally come because of COVID. And we're expecting some 30,000 people to attend, although again, that could be down because of the COVID restrictions. The arms companies displaying their wares include the very biggest of them. It certainly includes BAE System and Raytheon, who are big suppliers to the Saudi regime, who are currently prosecuting the war in Yemen, which is a war that has seen thousands of civilians killed and many tens of thousands left homeless and dealing with the effects of disease and malnutrition. It'll also be featuring Israeli arms companies such as IAI and Rafael, and they're quite heavily involved in the war in the West Bank. And so, as well as these sort of headline names, there's a lot of other smaller companies who are involved in selling weapons to countries around the world. The reason it's important is because the arms trade, as we've talked about, sparks and feeds conflict, certainly Yemen, certainly the West Bank, but also conflicts across Africa, Latin America, and Central Asia. What's also true is the arms companies themselves support repressive regimes through the sale of policing equipment, such as tear gas, such as riot shields and batons. And so many of the repressive regimes in the world actually rely on Western weaponry to maintain control of their population. So typically places like Bahrain, for example, have used British-made tear gas extensively. The third reason that we worry about the arms trade, and again, the deals that are done at DSEI, is they spark a lot of corruption. Also, Andrew Feinstein, who I think will be joining us this evening, has also has said that something like 40% of the world's corrupt payments are associated with arms trading, which, given the fact that sort of military products are really only responsible for about 1.5% of the global economy, is a vastly disproportionate level. And so, again, it's part of the way that Western countries repressive regimes exchange funds, and at each time the people in control of those regimes extract funding in terms of commissions and corrupt payments. So DSEI is at the heart of this business and features, as we say, some of the world's largest arms companies, some of the world's most repressive regimes, and also takes place in East London, which is an area which has seen a lot of influx from refugees fleeing the effects of these wars. And it's also experienced itself during World War II, the impact of war directly through bombing from the Nazi forces. So it's completely inappropriate that DSEI should be taking place at all. Definitely shouldn't be taking place in East London. And of all the things to be doing during a global pandemic, encouraging the spend on militaries and weapons and propping up repressive regimes is really the last thing that we as a country should be doing. So how can you take a step against this? Well, the protests are going on today and this evening. There'll also be another big protest tomorrow. There'll be a sort of an arms trade walk. There'll be another protest the day after at the back at Cllr with a display of Palestinian art as well as Palestinian-led gathering and discussion to highlight the impact of the arms trade on Palestine. You can definitely join those. You can definitely write to your MPs and councillors, give strength to their arm, especially those that have been vocal in their support for the campaign against DSEI. And you can also support those who have been arrested at DSEI by putting their bodies on the line, trying to stop deliveries of weapons to the army protest the arms dealers today. So 3 ways you can get involved. If you would like to get involved with some of the campaigns against other arms fairs, Liverpool had a very boisterous demonstration at the weekend against the arms fair taking place in October next month. There'll also be protests against the Farnborough DPRTE arms fair again in October, and in November there are also going to be big actions against the Malvern arms fair taking place in Melbourne, in the West Country. So a lot of things to get involved with if you would like to take steps against arms fairs and the arms trade. So hugely grateful to have been asked to talk this evening. Hopefully I'll be able to join you in person, or at least via Zoom from the protests, but we never know how these things go. And as I say, well done to CND for putting on this event, which I've been really grateful to have asked to take part in. Thank you and all the best.
Well, that's great to hear that from Kirsten. I'm so glad she made that recording. It would have been terrible not to hear from her. Kirsten's such an amazing, both activist and expert, and what great advice from her about how we can get involved. As Kirsten said, there are more events taking place over the next few days, including what Kirsten mentioned, the Stop Arming Israel event with the Palestine Solidarity Campaign later in the week. That builds on a really excellent demonstration that they had through Newham on Sunday, which was incredibly vibrant and very well received in those multinational streets of the borough. So there's been great things going on. There was a big blockade today down at the Arms Fair. So the activists are really doing the stuff. If we haven't been able to get down there in person ourselves, there are many, many ways in which we can be active to stop this dreadful trade in death. So big thank you to all our speakers. Thank you to you all for coming and joining us. Be active on this. I know many of you are. And above all, stay safe and hope to see you soon. Thank you for coming.